but you wanted to talk about Brendan Sullivan.
Yes. So again, we see another game slip by, and I know it was very competitive for the first half plus at, I believe, 17-14, 14-10, something in that range. And this Devontae Ross in particular, talk about explosive plays. He was the the author of three of them, 3 touchdowns. So he was a handful. But again, Kirk makes the decision not to go to Brendan Sullivan. K did play well, at least statistically, 19 of 23. So
Yeah,
what are your
his number, he threw for what, 80%, which is the first time for an Iowa quarterback that's happened since I don't know how long. I think it was did Stanley do it? I can't remember, but it's been a while. His numbers were good. The eye test would say he was okay. And we got to remember this is against a Troy defense that came in ranked around 100 nationally in total defense. So this was not a great Troy defense. The Iowa rushing attack did carve it up. And so I'm not trying to take away from Cade, but I just think the verdict is still out. I've never advocated for pulling Cade since he's gone to Iowa. I've never advocated for pulling Cade. What I've advocated for was actually having Brendan in for actual snaps. Now, what we did see Saturday was Iowa bringing him in on goal line situations, which was interesting to say the least. Loved the first series of calls down near the goal line with Brendan because they bring in Brendan Sullivan. Troy calls a timeout. They bring Brendan back on the field. What does he do? He hands off to Caleb Johnson. They get down to the 2. That's smart football, right? And hey, that second, the touchdown from Brendan where he flipped the ball to Addison Estringa, good play. He may have been able to make it on with his legs, may not have. But this statement from Kirk today regarding, Tom Kakert brought up, hey, if you thought about putting him in on more short yardage situations away from the goal line, he says things like, we haven't given it a lot of thought. I think we have to maybe stop reading so much into semantics with Kirk. I mean, he's disappointed fans as it relates to playing multiple quarterbacks for years, but I don't buy that. Like the fact that he said similar things over the first couple of weeks about Brendan playing at all, and then all of a sudden he's in there on every goal line situation. So I can't imagine that's true. If that is true, then that's ridiculous. If they really haven't given it a lot of thought, that you see what I'm saying, Mark? I just don't think you can. I think it's so ludicrous to think they haven't really given it much thought that I can't believe that to be true.
Well, they're doing it to a certain extent.
Well, the question though was about playing him more away from the goal line in more, hey, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations. Do you bring him in? And I don't even know that I agree with that. Not to say Tom was endorsing that idea, but I think get him in for a series here or there or a play here or there. I don't think you have to. I know about rhythm. We all talk about rhythm, especially with quarterbacks, running backs, etc. I just think bringing him in away from the goal line. Hey, if K goes down, how long have we been talking about this? If he goes down, Brendan is the guy the rest of the season. And so far, they haven't given him any meaningful snaps. And to me, it just makes no sense not to do so. But Troy was kind of the last chance we had to see that. And so I don't know how we walk away from that game sort of disappointed that we didn't see him play more. But at the same time, we saw him play in a couple of meaningful snaps for the first time this season. It wasn't garbage time. They were goal line situations. It was a schematic change. So I give credit to Tim Lester and give credit to Kirk Ferentz because ultimately that has to go through him. I do think Iowa will have everything ready in the playbook for Minnesota. I think this is not that they wouldn't have everything ready against Iowa State, but it's the second game of the season. This is a Minnesota game you have to think Kirk really wants. And I think back to recent years. I think back to 2018. Iowa ran at least one trick play. I believe that was the game where the long snapper tossed it to TJ Hawkinson and he went end around for a touchdown. Maybe we see a fake play this weekend. Maybe we see some trickeration. I don't know, but hey, I like Tim Lester and LeVar Woods as it relates to innovation, but Kirk's got to be willing to accept that, and maybe that involves Brendan Sullivan. It was good to see him in there. I just wish we'd see him a more, not necessarily short yardage situations, but just every down and distance type of situations.
Because the same coach who was telling us, Kirk Ferentz, who is telling us that, and this came up again today, It's taken Cade McNamara apparently a long, long time, and he's still not back to where he was at Michigan because he suffered through injuries, didn't play, still played almost 4 games last year, that he's not yet. He's still just getting back to where he was. Well, I understand that's from an injury standpoint as well, but it also has to do with rust because he has been healthy since when? At least since the spring or late spring or into the summer, healthy enough to compete for the job, win the job, and now play 3 games. Apply that same logic to Brendan Sullivan. If Cade McNamara does get hurt at some point in the season, and Sullivan's been on the shelf and never played a meaningful down for this football team with these players, aside from Jacob Gill, then you've put yourself in a situation where your quarterback is going to be rusty and out of sync, most likely.
And let me give you some parting thoughts on this. We brought it up at the outset. This, by all accounts, so far, and historically for the most part, is a solid Minnesota DB room. So they are going to challenge Iowa. Troy did not. Okay. And I guess that's what I'm saying. I didn't think Cade looked great in spite of his good numbers. There were a couple of plays, like one that was outstretched catch by Jacob Gill. That guy catches everything anywhere close to him. It's such an opposite to what we saw under Kelton Copeland and Brian Ferentz. Those guys watch. He catches everything near him. Jarrett Bowie had a nice catch. Caden Weegan had a nice catch. So Terrell Washington had a nice catch. I think the receivers helped Cade's numbers, and that Troy defense helped Cade's numbers. Now, this week, Minnesota is going to challenge him. And so if Cade is against good Power 4 competition, if he's the quarterback we saw against the only Power 4 opponent on the schedule to this point, that will shine through, I believe, this Saturday. And we may see Brendan. I maybe wishful thinking, but the fact that he came in for any meaningful snaps at all, if he comes out against their second Power 4 opponent and picks up where he left off in the fourth quarter against Iowa State, then I'd be advocating for Brendan. Not necessarily you yank Cade permanently, but giving him some snaps. Now, I think it's a possibility because I think it's logical. That doesn't mean Kirk agrees with it. But very intriguing game on so many levels. And having it as a night game, I'll probably be doing a post-game show until 1. It's going to be a fun one. And again, how many times are we going to have to watch that highlight of Cooper DeJean and the illegal signal and all that nonsense this weekend?
Well, the networks want to play up a narrative, and that's the best one to go to in this matchup. But it is for the Floyd of Rosedale, and a traditional matchup in which Iowa has owned the series convincingly in recent times, certainly 8 of 9, and that includes the botched call last year even. They're a 2.5-point favorite at Minnesota. Look at that over-under. I forgot to put it up there, 36. So Iowa continues to post those kind of over-unders. But, hey, they broke through it last week with 59 combined points.
What was the over-under for the Illinois State game? Do you know? I think they've hit the over on every game this year, haven't they?
I believe so.
So it's like, yeah, not to say that Iowa's some juggernaut now, but who cares what the over-under is because Iowa keeps hitting the over.
Yeah.
We'll see if they do that in Big Ten play. But, hey, they scored 40 against Illinois State, scored 38 this past week. And, 20 wasn't great again. Had 13 points. I can't. That game is just – that will always be the thorn in Iowa's side if they don't make the playoffs. The fact that they found a way to lose that game, unbelievable.
And we were kicking around the Big Ten at the outset of the show. Just one more quick note, since we won't likely speak, at least on air. There's a nice little game going on in the Big Ten Friday night as part of this Fox Friday night, mostly Big Ten matchups. Nebraska, Illinois.
Illinois has looked surprisingly good. And there's another team. I mean, both those teams can't win this weekend, but those are a couple teams on the Iowa schedule that I think Illinois is on the Iowa schedule, aren't they? Or are they not now? I'm trying to remember. Michigan State, Washington, Northwestern, Nebraska, Maryland, Ohio State, Minnesota. I'm at 7. Who am I missing?
That's a good question.
Wisconsin, that's 8.
No Illinois.
No Illinois. Who's 9?
in order: Minnesota, Ohio State, Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland,
UCLA. Okay.
Nebraska.
UCLA. All right.
No
So if I'm
Illinois.
Iowa, I like Brett Bielema. Root for the Huskers. I know that's painful for Iowa fans, but I think you want Nebraska to win as much as possible. If you want to, some people are just like I say, they're just turned off by any playoff conversation. But if you want Iowa to have any chance at 10-2 to make the playoffs, you need that Nebraska game as a marquee win. And the only way that happens is if Nebraska keeps winning. They
Illinois
look
has
pretty,
already beaten what is supposed to be one of the best teams in the Big 12,
yeah.
Kansas. And then their other two wins were not against good teams, but where Illinois has typically struggled against the FAUs and the MAC schools, they just took care of business, blew them both out. So
And
impressive start for Brett Bielema.
the Big Ten has found a way on a couple of games to lose games they shouldn't have lost. Northwestern should have beaten Duke. Iowa should have beaten Iowa State. And I'm not just talking about, I think one team's better than the other, but the way the games played out, if you watch those games, Northwestern
Minnesota,
should have.
Northwestern.
What's that?
Minnesota, Northwestern.
North Carolina, you mean?
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's 3 games right there. And then you have the beatdown that Wisconsin was handed over the weekend. So I don't know. I know it's Alabama, but still, to do that on the road, impressive stuff.
Yeah. All right. You can catch the audio version of not only this show, but all of Corey's work. Good sampling of it on From the Hawkeye of the Storm on your favorite audio platform. Of course, join Corey for the post game and tons of great content there at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Be back here next Tuesday. We'll talk the Minnesota game and look ahead, of course, at the Big Ten schedule right here at the Voice of College Football.